Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Today, I'm here to speak to you about the development of modern-day military police leadership that can be projected on the future battle space. Prior to starting today, I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land in which we live and recognise their continuing connection to this land. I wish to pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging. I want to talk today about the Australian Military Police and their necessary leadership and collaborative development with Australia's premier domestic and international policing organisation, the Australian Federal Police, or AFP. This will need to be conducted both within Australia through training and strategic capacity development and internationally in future battle space environments. Australia is in the enviable position of being at peace since Federation. We have not known open hostilities within our borders and are the beneficiaries of living on a continent surrounded by water, meaning we have also not known open hostilities upon our border. This has led to one of the most prosperous times we have known, and may ever know. Being separated from other countries geographically, however, has not made us immune from the world's problems. Indeed, war, terrorism, climate change, pandemics, and a myriad of other potential catastrophic disasters threaten the peace and security many of us have lived with all of our lives. As a good world neighbour, and to fulfil our international treaty obligations, Australia regularly commits the police and military to these types of international conflicts. Australia has the benefit of law enforcement experience of the separate state and territory police forces, as well as the AFP in the provision of domestic community policing in their respective areas. The AFP also provides a federal policing capacity that targets organised, transnational, people smuggling, illicit drug trafficking, and e-crimes. The AFP is also the primary organisation Australia relies upon to provide capacity building, executive policing, and to execute community policing on international operations. This last capability provided by the AFP is the topic of this speech, and a proposed progression plan of collaboration between the AFP and military police will be laid out. While the AFP has worked admirably in pushing its capacity building agenda in regional countries, its lasting effect in high threat and failing states such as Afghanistan has led to questions being asked about how best to develop, lead, promote and collaborate with policing tasks in these environs. This is where the military police are best positioned to offer their unique capabilities. The military police commander, right from the provost marshal through to the youngest general duties officer, must know how to lead, train, advise and assist policing effects in theatres of asymmetrical and high threat. They must know the strategic to tactical military and police missions back to front where their roles require, and be able to absorb traditional and the emerging host nation rule of law requirements. They must be able to quickly assimilate traditional, host nation and coalition-led policing policy, as well as adhering and applying the mission's requirements, all the while having strict adherence to fundamental rights such as human rights. Finally, they must also be ready to move from full war fighting to community policing, sometimes within a matter of hours. It is in these special characteristics that set the military police apart from its civilian counterparts, and where domestic collaborative efforts now will lead to successful implementation of policing plans in these future high-threat missions. The first part of the presentation will focus on the current status of the military police and AFP, moving into current and future operational trends that will challenge the norm for capacity building in high-threat, asymmetrical nations. Thirdly, a proposed way forward will be presented to ensure law and order are at the forefront when wars end and capacity building starts, with collaborative arrangement concepts for the military police and AFP, which includes information and data sharing capabilities, both domestically and internationally. Finally, the ability to measure the outputs and outcomes of these collaborative arrangements will be discussed. It was former AFP Commissioner Mick Kilty who said, "The future policing environment is a conundrum that I believe can be broken down into its component parts, and looking for the weaknesses or the area of intervention that will maximise the impact you're going to have on a problem. You won't do that as a single organisation, you must do it as a partner. This is never more accurate than the dynamic of policing post-conflict states. First, it is important to identify what this proposal is not aiming to achieve and what it is. This proposal is not aiming to have the military police assume any domestic policing capacity across the states and territories upon civilians. It is also not a lead into the military police taking roles away from the AFP on international operations. What it aims to achieve is a collaborative approach to the modern and future battle spaces in regards to policing and capacity building. It also aims to bring military policing up to current federal policing standards, as well as promote modern-day policing approaches to leadership and organisational development within the military police. Currently, there is very little collaboration between the two organisations. There is an AFP liaison officer embedded with the Australian Defence Force Investigative Service who offers advice and guidance to investigative matters where the AFP can assist. The majority of the decisions on military and police employment on international missions is made at the Headquarters Joint Operations Command, where an AFP liaison officer sits in and advises defence and other key stakeholders as to policing policy and employment. This is also replicated with the AFP having a seat at the National Security Committee of Cabinet. This is not surprising given the AFP's focus on strategic issues as detailed previously, not solely international operations, and the military police being focused on the tactical level maintenance of service discipline and policing the force. It is also indicative of the current structure that the military police are subject to command, direction and influence in how they conduct operations, whereas subject to mission taskings, threat levels and whole of government priorities, the AFP has relative autonomy to conduct its executive policing and capacity development mandate as it sees fit. This relative autonomy comes with conditions, however. Current and future trends of conflict and post-conflict environs point to significant change in the way these missions will be conducted, as well as significant increase in the potential threats that will face capacity building forces. These threats will develop and compound in what is often described as the deployment gap, the period of time between the end of conflict and the time coalition military and police forces are at full capacity to move into these operational zones and effect their mission requirements. This gap can last from weeks to months, maybe longer. This will potentially be the norm when most future conflict and post-conflict operations will be conducted in areas such as megacities with dense populations in relatively small areas. As such, this period can lead to belligerent forces either being ex-military or criminal elements, consolidating and reinforcing their power bases and building and extending their illicit reach. With technological weapon advances moving forward at a rapid pace, these belligerent forces may start employing technology such as cyber attacks, lethal autonomous weapon systems, and off-the-shelf drone technology against intervening police and military forces. Where these technologies prove their worth is through removing individuals and groups from the conflict zone and force multiplying a smaller belligerent force through the employment of capability matching technology with coalition forces. This can take many forms, one example being the utilisation of swarms of lethal drones to create force overmatch, leading to a relatively minor human and financial expense outlay for belligerent forces themselves, however with potentially tremendous payoff in human and logistic loss for coalition forces. Current and future trends also show that intrastate conflict is on the rise, and these post-conflict capacity building missions will not reduce in the short to medium term. This is where the military police are required to be capable to move from peer or near-peer warfighting conflict through to beginning the process of host nation police development within the deployment gap and beyond, and do so as near to the same capability as the AFP. At present, the military police are not seen as an actor that can assist, let alone commence police capacity building initiatives, with the AFP preferring to utilise ADF forces as transport, logistics and security partners only in these types of high threat environments, as was the case with their recent policing mission in Afghanistan. It is a realism of current and future conflict and post-conflict environments that the levels of lethality in these missions are set to increase. Indeed, in future conflict and post-conflict missions, the lethality of these environments may correlate to an extension of the deployment gap, leading to a lack of suitable civilian policing capacity builders and a necessity to prevent belligerent forces establishing criminal networks in the ensuring lawlessness during this gap. The military police will need to be employed in both a police executive and host nation capacity building role. This may also mean that the military police are needed to be in a stronger position with their police leadership, executive policing, and capacity building skills than is currently identified. In order to create a competent and skilled force that can produce outputs which are acceptable to and meet AFP mission priorities, two domestic and two international recommendations need to be considered in order to develop military police capabilities. These are 1. Developing strategic police leadership and education for the military police within the AFP structure and in line with AFP priorities in order to learn and develop their policing capacity. 2. Training, policy, and doctrine development at the tactical and operational levels domestically through training and exercises with the AFP. 3. Internationally, information and data sharing on host nation police capacity building missions is essential in order to facilitate situational awareness for the AFP and military police on the ground. And 4. Identifying outputs, outcomes, and impacts between the two organisations in an international sphere that will mutually benefit these two organisations on those military operations. Leadership has always been a key element, not just in a domestic setting, but internationally. Domestically, one of the main topics was the development of leadership and education in a policing sphere. As Stephen Pearce states in his report, Leadership Development in Australia and Policing, the Role of Education, he reinforces that in the face of constant change, policing requires leadership that provides clear guidance, innovative solutions, and confident, assured direction. He also goes on to quote Murray in the 2000 RCMP Gazette, who states, "Development of leaders not only entails formal training and education where necessary, but exposure to a range of experience that can eventually be used in leading and managing a police organisation." The majority, if not all, of the current military police command team have leadership and management experience, as well as leadership and management in tertiary education. It is the in-depth strategic police leadership and the experience that is lacking for them, and this issue can be resolved in some way by seconding military police staff into the AFP Command and International Deployment Group, where they can learn police leadership, strategic police direction, and other useful leadership and management experiences in a collaborative environment. Developing the skills of the military police and partnering them with the AFP on exercises at the tactical and operational level in a domestic setting is another approach that will pay dividends on future international deployments. Knowing and understanding how each organisation operates and generating policy, doctrine, and procedures regarding employment of a force of this capacity will not only identify governance and accountability structures, but will also have the added benefit of developing relationships and trust that is all too important in these asymmetric, high-threat environments. The potential of this partnership should not be understated. Domestically, civilian police, including the AFP, do not work in a silo. They form community relationships and engagements with other organisational stakeholders to reach successful resolution to a modern-day policing problem, and on international operations, it should be no different. As a potentially significant partner agency in operations, the military police can provide benefits both in the physical and operational terms. Megan O'Neill identifies in her report, Playing Nicely with Others, Lessons from Success in Partnership Working, that while these co-location facilities can be complex to set up and bring with them a degree of cost, police officers involved in these arrangements report that it is of huge benefit not only to their employment, but also to the operational capability when working in such close proximity to their partners. She also states that engaging in these partnerships can bring greater familiarity partners individually, better understanding of each other's roles and resources, and better communication of data and progress reporting. Domestically, however, primarily internationally, information and data sharing between the two organisations can ensure that when these missions eventually develop into future tasking requirements, military police and the AFP elements that engage host nation policing organisations in executive and training capacity building missions are fully conversant with the current host nation policing capacity and the strategic direction of that organisation, and how, in times of partial or full breakdown of law enforcement and law and order, the traditional rule of law and how local economic, developmental and environmental influences will affect improvement efforts in the future. Bailey and Perito identify in their 2010 book, The Police in War, that resistance to reform may not stem from a failure to understand the norms of Western or community policing, but social pressures to ignore them. They go on to state that trainers need to think carefully about when they should defer to tradition rather than insisting on reform. As a result of this failure to prepare and share information, many historical examples proved that a lack of planning and preparation, inclusive of information gathering and sharing between organisations, can lead to catastrophic situations, none more than an example than the 2003 intervention in Iraq. In Etan Shamir's 2011 book, Transforming Command, he identifies that the Army relied on faulty strategic and operational planning assumptions. Units were inadequately trained, headquarters were unprepared, and planners had failed to account for some fundamental contingencies, including policing. Various agencies, including police agencies, became involved at this latter stage, but their respective spheres of influence were sufficiently delineated. These fundamental errors need to be understood, and the lessons learned impose a significant change of thought as to how both the military police and AFP strategically approach these current and future battle space challenges. Finally, in an effort to understand not only the effects of the policing organisations being mentored and trained internationally, but also identify where improvements can be made, certain assessments of capacity need to be conducted in order to facilitate and target how best to build police capacity. Training and development of host nation police capacity presents a number of unique challenges for the trainers, and an AFP military police collaborative effort on operations will not be immune from this requirement. The military police and AFP will need to develop a measurement and capacity building assessment guide for high threat areas where the AFP cannot go. That can guide the military police in development and allows for the MPs to commence police capacity building initiatives and assessments with the host nation police force, and that the capacity building response is in line with AFP priorities and identified mission requirements. Community opinion, crime rates, citizen cooperation with police, response times, and clearance rates are all good measurements of outcomes, as well as the measurement of processes adopted by the host nation police forces, especially in the areas of transparency and accountability. These all account for a well-developed policing organisation. While the military police will not be able to implement all of the above structures without significant investment from the AFP and other coalition police forces, it is identified that a conjunction of the above effects will lead to the military police being able to set footprints and foundations for future implementation of these outcomes in a high-threat asymmetrical environment, if adequately trained to do so right now in the present. Whether the assessment tool be the OECD's Monitoring and Evaluation Guide, Princeton University's PRIME system of measurement, or a blended model of many of the guides suitable for AFP or military police use, it must be robust enough to guide police improvement measurements and initiatives in a dynamic environment. The implementation of this assessment tool will enable the AFP to swiftly move into and take over the drive for successful outcomes from the military police as efficiently and smoothly as possible when ground reality dictates. In conclusion, this transformational type of approach to collaboration between the AFP and military police can lead to the future success of executive policing and police capacity development missions in high-threat environments. If all four effects are adopted and are to lead to greater improvements and interoperability between the two organisations, a radical shift of strategic mindset and approach to capacity development of host nation police will need to ensure, both within the AFP and the military. The journey to bring this concept to fruition will be a long and arduous one. However, the benefits will far outweigh the drawbacks. It is sure to be one hell of a ride. Thank you for your time.